Okay, well, welcome everybody to the second episode of the Betterment Blueprint. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of failure, one of my favorite topics, and also one of my least favorite topics because who likes failure? Everybody hates failure, but we really shouldn't, and that's kind of the thesis of my whole point today. Failure is one of those things that we have to talk about because if we want to do anything worthwhile with our lives, it's something that we're inevitably going to experience. And it's important that we receive its presence in our life in the most effective way possible so that we don't get discouraged, we don't get pulled away from our path. I think the best way I've ever had the importance of failure demonstrated to me is actually through a metaphor. And it's through the metaphor of a pendulum. Okay? And you may have heard of this before, the pendulum of life. So I want you to imagine a pendulum swinging from side to side. Okay? And if you don't know about the physics of pendulums, so let me give you a little bit of a background about it because it's a little important. Pendulums, at least in an ideal scenario, they always swing from one side to the other side in equal amounts of distance. So if it swings to the right, 3 inches, then it'll always swing to the left 3 inches. If it swings to the right 7 inches, it's going to swing to the left 7 inches. Okay, that's called its amplitude. And anyways, the point is that on one side of the pendulum, you have all of the good things about life, right? Success, happiness, pleasure, enjoyment, laughter. And on the other side, you have all of the horrible things about life, right? Pain, boredom, hatred, and failure. And the point of the pendulum is to show you that most people live their lives in this tiny little zone close to the center of the pendulum when it's at rest, right? Let's call it just 3 inches out from the center, 3 inches to the right, 3 inches to the left, right? So if you take the pendulum and you swing it just a little bit to the right, just a few inches, that's all it's going to swing to the left, right? And so it's swinging 3 inches into the good zone and 3 inches into the bad zone. And that's what we call the comfort zone, okay? Because yes, you're only experiencing a little bit of failure, a little bit of pain, only a little bit of hatred. You're also only experiencing a little bit of pleasure and only a little bit of success. And that is where most people feel comfortable, right? And you can see this demonstrated all over the world in every single arena of life. Take your pick. I think relationships are a favorite example of mine because I see it in people all over the place. I see it in myself too sometimes. Is that, like many people, it can be scary to commit to relationships with people. It can be scary to go deep with people. Even outside of the context of romance, it can be so scary to get close to somebody because they can hurt you. They can hurt you really bad. You show them the real you. You show them all of the things about you that you're scared to show anybody else. And yeah, it's really nice. They know you better than anybody else, but they can also hurt you worse than anybody else, right? And that's just the way that it is, right? The deeper you go with somebody, the more you open up to them, the deeper your relationship is, the more happiness it brings to your life. But there's also a possibility that they could bring a lot of pain, right? Think about marriage, which for most people in our society is kind of like the highest form of connection with somebody. It's like the ultimate commitment that you can make. And divorce is also seen as like the worst thing ever that can happen to you in a relationship. It's like the ultimate form of romantic relationship pain. When you're becoming best friends with somebody, it's like so cool. It's like what we all strive for when we meet somebody that we enjoy being around. And those best friend breakups, those hurt. Those mess you up for months and years even. And so a lot of people, they just get kind of close. You know, they date around, they have fun, but they don't get too close. They keep it comfortable. And as soon as things get scary, they dip. And you can't really blame them. That's a choice that everyone is allowed to make, right? But I think the thing that I always think about when I see people doing that is, yeah, you might be limiting the negatives, the potential downsides of getting close to somebody. You might be protecting yourself from getting hurt, but you're also kind of limiting the potential upsides. And of course, this is open to debate, and this is just my opinion. And I don't want anyone to take this personally, because I think most people my age, they kind of date around the way that I'm describing. And you know, everyone has their own ways of approaching romance. And some of my closest friends in the world would heavily disagree with what I'm saying right now. But I think that for most people, that avoidance of long-term relationships, that avoidance of getting close to people, it's to avoid pain and it's to avoid discomfort. But it also unintentionally avoids all of the good things that can come with going deep with somebody, right? Or let's like go to a completely different arena. Let's go to the world of jobs and career and business, right? And I think most people, when I talk to them, when I've gotten to know them well enough, I find out that they have some version of a dream job, right? Something that they just know would light them up inside to be able to do every day. The kind of job where it wouldn't even feel like a job anymore, where it would feel like work. It wouldn't feel like work. It would feel like play. Okay, and for somebody like me, like this is my version of that. You know, creating content, coaching people. That's always been my dream, and I have so much fun doing it. It never feels like work. It just feels like I'm hanging out with people. And so many people, they have this version of that in their head, but they've done so little to have that dream job. They settle for these shitty little 9-to-5s that they don't really care about, that they're just in it for the paycheck, right? And usually it's because it's safe, right? Because those dream jobs, the ones that we would be so happy to be in, they're a little risky. They're usually not like these readily available jobs that you can find on job boards or whatever, paying $15-20 an hour. They usually come at some great personal risk to pursue, right? If you want to like start your own business, there's a significant investment of money and time that takes, and there's zero guarantee that your business venture will work out, whatever it may be, right? For me, that's coaching and making content. For someone else, that might be selling beef jerky with your own special spice rub. I got a friend who does that. It might be selling website services online. I got another friend who does that, right? And all of these different arenas, to strike out on your own, to create that ideal version of your career, the upside is humongous, right? You could probably make more money, spend less time working, and all in all feel better about yourself. But it's scary. The risk is high, right? To go for that sort of job requires swinging the pendulum so far to the right, and inevitably it's going to swing really far to the left. Okay, and that's kind of the point, that I have taken way too long to get to, which is that the further you swing the pendulum in either direction, the further it'll swing in the other direction. And that is how the world works. Okay, you cannot swing the pendulum in just one direction. It's not going to work, okay? If you're going to go for gold, if you're going to shoot for that business that you've always wanted to be in, or that job that you've always wanted to work, or that relationship you always wanted to be in, the risk is there, and there are going to be failures. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. And that's why when you really think about it, it's so confusing and counterproductive to look at failure as a negative thing. It is no more or less an indicator of success than victory is. It's really just a stepping stone on the path to the life that you want to create. Okay? Failure and success are both indicators that you're moving in the right direction. Okay? Obviously, there's context there, right? You can have all of the success in the wrong direction, right? As my dad always says, you could spend all your time climbing the ladder only to realize that the ladder has been propped up against the wrong wall the whole time. Okay, so success can be just as much as can be just as much a version of getting off track as failure can. Okay, they're really not all that different. It's really society somewhere along the line demonized the idea of failure. And we as people in the society, we have to do better. Okay, not just for the other people in our society, but for us. Okay, because when and I'm just as guilty of this. Okay, I'm by no means exempt from this condemnation I'm about to give, but anytime we see someone quote unquote failing, we always react the same way. We make fun of them. We think, well, damn, that sucks. Like, sorry, bud. Like, better luck next time. We treat failure like it's a bad thing. And we do that from a very early age. And we do that as we're growing up, and then we become parents. Some of us become parents, and then we do that to our kids, and the cycle continues. And someone's got to break the cycle. Someone's got to stop treating failure like it's a bad thing, because it's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to feel bad. It literally doesn't have to feel bad. There's this amazing example that I read about, and there's a book that Adam Grant wrote. It's called Think Again. I highly recommend it. It is all about this idea of how important it is to be able to rethink our beliefs in life. And the particular example that he was talking about was actually in the context of a classroom. And I can't remember what subject it was. I think they were relatively young elementary school kids. And the assignment was really simple, just to draw a butterfly. Okay, and so every kid would draw what they thought a butterfly looked like, except the assignment didn't end there. Okay, each kid would go up in front of the class and they would present their drawing, and they would receive feedback from the teacher and from the other kids in the class. You know, like, hey, little Johnny, I think if you made the antennas a little longer, like, it'd look a little bit more like a butterfly. Or, hey, like, I think, like, if you made this a little more colorful, like, it would look really pretty. Or, hey, like, you know, butterflies have 2 sets of wings, not 6. Yada, yada. You know? The point is, they got all of this feedback. And it was demonstrated for them that feedback is not a bad thing. That it's meant to support you and help you improve. And still, the assignment didn't end there, right? The kids took this feedback and they drew their butterflies again. And then they went up in front of the class and they got feedback again. And then they drew it again. And then they got feedback again. And then they drew it again. And I think this class in particular iterated this assignment like a ridiculous number of times, like anywhere from 5 to 10 times. And by the end of it, the butterflies that these kids drew were incredibly accurate and incredibly aesthetic. And they did it by teaching these kids and showing them that feedback is actually so incredibly valuable, right? And teaching them that, yes, like you drew this butterfly and it could be better, but that's not a bad thing. It's just where you're at in the moment. And if you want to make it better, here's how you can make it better. And I think that is a really wonderful, highly functional example of teaching people to reframe their perspectives around failure. Because I bet even when I'm explaining this example, even when I'm thinking about it, it's so easy to reframe each drawing not as a failure, but as another step in the process, as just another step in the assignment. It's just like when you're writing an essay, right? You draft it, you get some feedback from your teacher. I guess nowadays it'd probably be from ChatGPT, and then you write another draft, and then you get feedback on that, and then you just keep making it better and better and better. And at some point you decide, okay, I'm not going to do any more, right? And that becomes your final draft. But it's just a process. And everything in life is like that. Everything in life is drawing those butterflies. Everything in life is writing those essays, right? Whether going back to dating, right? It's like nobody has success with their first relationship. Okay, I guess I shouldn't say nobody. Very few people have success with their first relationship, right? What happens? You realize, oh shit, like this is kind of hard, right? This is a whole other person with an entire host of likes and dislikes and needs and wants and quirks. And that's a lot of work to be in a relationship with them. And usually the relationship crashes and burns. Sometimes it's a little gentler than that, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work out. And we've conditioned ourselves and we've conditioned each other to see that as a bad thing, right? When really it's just an incompatibility or it's bad timing. Maybe you just aren't the person that you need to be yet to be in a successful relationship with that particular person. There's nothing wrong with that. Just a step of the process, right? And even if you are a part of the small percentage of people who your very first relationship just worked out magically, right? My parents would enter into this category. It's still a never-ending process of trial and error. It's just within the same relationship, right? You have your fights, you have your disagreements, you work it out. You figure it out, you move on, right? Fighting or disagreeing isn't seen as failure. It's just a step in the process of clarifying beliefs, clarifying needs, clarifying wants. It's just a part of the process of creating clarity in a relationship with somebody. In fitness, when you start to work out, what happens to everybody when they first start to work out? They get super sore. Usually at some point they hurt themselves because their technique is not that great. Usually at some point they fall off the consistency horse. And it doesn't matter that you mess up. It doesn't matter that you go way too hard and pull something and have to take a few weeks off while you heal. I mean, okay, ideally you don't do that. Ideally you take your time and you take it slow and you build your muscle correctly. But usually it doesn't go that way, right? We're human beings. And that's okay. That's just a part of the process of becoming good at working out, of learning technique, and of finding what you enjoy, right? Or how about the first time you make a budget, try to follow some sort of income plan. I think you would be loath to find a single person who did that right off the bat. I mean, there's just so many things to buy, and they're all just so much fun to buy. You're going to mess up. You're going to go off plan. You're going to go off book. You're going to blow your budget, and that's okay. That's just a part of the process of learning why budgets are important, and part of the process of learning how and why we budget. So, I mean, I got one more example. I think this one's important, right? And you might not relate to this one if you're not a gamer, but literally any video game ever, if you're playing at any sort of level of difficulty, and even then, even if you're playing at whatever the easiest level the game has, you're going to die. You're going to get stuck, and you're going to lose every now and then, right? But that's okay. Especially in the context of games, I think it's really easy to reframe failure as just a part of the process. Especially a lot of those like grinding level up games, you die all the time. That's okay. It sucks. It sucks to die and lose all of your stuff, or it sucks to die and have to start over. And it can be frustrating, but ultimately, that's kind of what makes the game fun. It would kind of be a shitty game if you were able to do everything all in one shot and it wasn't challenging for you at all. That would be a boring game. You would not play that game ever again. Life's really the same way. It's not a game. It's a lot more serious than that. But that doesn't mean you can't treat it like one. Okay? So, I think after talking about all of that, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this concept of failure, we need a replacement philosophy. Okay? One that, because it's tough. It's tough to just sit here and say, okay, like, stop taking failure so seriously. Like, it's not that big of a deal, guys. Like, okay, like, maybe you even see the value of what I'm saying, but it's tough to implement any of that without some sort of replacement. And I think that the answer is pretty simple, and probably one you've learned about before, although in a different context. I want you to go back to your 8th grade science classroom, and I want you to remember what your science teacher taught you about the scientific method. Okay? For those of you that don't remember, for those of you that weren't paying attention in science, the scientific method is the process by which scientists test hypotheses and collect data and create conclusions, right? And it's really the scientific cycle, okay? Because it never ends. You create a hypothesis about something, you go out there, you test it with an experiment, you collect the data, you compare the data to your hypothesis and see if you were right. Usually you're wrong, and then you repeat the process again. You come up with a new hypothesis based on the data you collected, and you rinse and repeat. And that is the scientific method, the scientific cycle, if you will. And I think that if we treated our lives in the same way we treated experimentation and data collection in the scientific method, that would be so much better. Because the scientific method is that concept of failure, the concept of things falling apart, of things not working out, of you being way off the mark. That's expected. That's a part of the process. That's a joyous, fun part of the process, and that's rewarded, right? If I don't know how many of you are in the science world, but people write papers about their failures, right? They write papers. They say, this was my hypothesis. Here's what I tested. Turns out I was totally wrong, and I have to go back to the drawing board, right? And people write papers like that, and they get published in big journals. And everyone's like, wow, holy cow, like, this guy was totally wrong. So cool. Like, that's how the scientific world and the scientific community works. Okay, because There's nothing wrong with failure. That's an important and integral and unavoidable and inevitable part of the process. And life is so much the same way. It's just one big experiment. And most of the time, we don't really have any idea what we're doing. We're just running around with our hypotheses, running experiments, collecting the data, seeing if we were right, and then trying again. And it's beautiful, and it's lovely, and it's fun as long as you have the right mindset about it. Okay? So, just to give an example of how I've been approaching this in my own life, I have spent a lot of time in the personal development world. And I've spent a lot of time with my therapist, specifically, talking about how my romantic relationships have been affected by my relationship with personal development. And there's not a whole lot of ways I think that pursuing personal development can fuck you up, but here's one way. For the first 22 years of my life, I thought that personal development was the key to getting into the perfect romantic relationship. Okay? And I don't quite know when that theory, that hypothesis developed, but somewhere along the way it developed. And at the time, it felt like a really good hypothesis, right? And what this looks like on the ground is I date somebody for a little bit and it falls apart, and I do some self-analysis and some reflection, and I talk to my therapist and I talk to my friends, and I figure out, where did I go wrong? What could I have done better? Okay. And like I said, it sounds good on paper, but what I was really asking is, what's wrong with me? What do I need to change about myself so that the next time this doesn't happen? So that the next time I'm successful in this relationship, so that if I were to go back and I had another chance with this person, this time it would work out. That was the real hypothesis. And I spent, like I said, 22 is a bit of an estimate because I can't remember. I don't remember how long I've been in therapy, but I was operating with this hypothesis, and that ran my entire dating life. And as you can imagine, that wreaked havoc on my sense of self-esteem and on my self-worth as a human being, because every time anything went wrong in the context of a romantic relationship, I always assumed there was something wrong with me. There was something that I needed to do better. So there's something better that I needed to be. And again, I can't really remember when this started to change, but at some point I came upon a new hypothesis that, yes, while there are always things I could have done better, and there are always ways I could have been better in my past relationships, that doesn't really mean that there's something wrong with me. It just means that we were, at that point in time, incompatible. Right? Because if you extend that hypothesis that I had, if you extrapolate a little bit, the only way in which someone who sees personal development as a way to get into a relationship will ever happily be in a relationship is if they become perfect, right? They have to reach this inscrutable level of never ever making a mistake, never ever saying or doing the wrong thing, always being able to read their partner's mind, and always being attractive. And that's crazy. No one could ever do that. And that's not a level I could ever reach. And so it occurred to me that I'm always going to be a work in process. Wait, a work in progress. I'm always going to be a work in progress. And that's never going to change. There's always going to be things I need to work on and things that I need to change. So perhaps the point isn't to keep improving so that I can get into a relationship. Perhaps the point is to get into a relationship with somebody who's okay with my flaws and is okay with the fact that I'm a work in progress and is willing to support me in that progress. And I willing to support them in their progress, because they will also be a work in progress. They will also not be perfect. And so my dating hypothesis has changed a lot in the last 2 years, and it's a lot less about finding the perfect person and a lot more about finding the person willing to put in the work to become a better partner. And therefore, it's also been about me becoming someone who's willing to put in the work. Not someone who's trying to be perfect, just someone willing to put in the work. And that's really changed things for me. And feels like a pretty good hypothesis. I will say I'm probably still wrong, right? There's probably still something that I'm missing. Some aspect of my hypothesis that is incomplete or in completely the wrong direction. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that I'm a failure. That doesn't mean that my relationships are failures. That doesn't mean that I'm on the wrong path. It just means that I'm one step closer to the ideal hypothesis, the one that will help me get into and help me stay in a healthy, long-term romantic relationship. And when I find out that I'm wrong, and when I figure out how I'm wrong, and I come up with a new hypothesis, I will let you guys know. But the point is that there's nothing wrong with where I'm at right now. This is a part of the process, and I got to go through this part of the process to get to where I want to be. And look, I'll also be honest with you, sitting here, looking at the camera, talking to the microphone, it's really easy to talk about this stuff. In the moment, when things go wrong, in the moment when the date goes poorly, in the moment when the relationship ends, it's very easy to see things as a failure. And like I said, I'm as much of a work in progress now as I've always been. And even in the particular context of trying to look at failure as just a step in the process, sometimes I mess up too. And that in of itself is also not a failure, but a part of the process. So to kind of bring it all together, the most effective way to look at failure is not as a sign that you're doing something wrong, but as a sign that you're doing something right. Because to make something work, whatever it is that you're trying to make work, it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of trial and a lot of error. It's going to take trying a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And necessarily most of them are not going to work. Until you find the one way that does work, all of the other ways are not going to work. It's a numbers game. And it's an endurance game. And I just implore you to remember that you can't lose if you don't give up. Something that Alex Hormozi always says, that I find a lot of strength and truth in. You can't lose if you don't give up. So just keep trying. Take those failures, quote unquote failures, in stride. Honestly, we should just give them a completely different name. I feel like the word failure is just, it's lost. It's been used in that particular context with that particular connotation for so long. I feel like just continuing to use the same word is just like beating your head against a brick wall. Like, it's not going to change anything. But If I think of a better word, I'll let you guys know. But for now, just try to remember that failure is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a step in the process in the right direction.